Good evening, everybody, and welcome back to Speaking of Jazz with the West Michigan Jazz Society. Tonight, we have an incredibly special guest who is an incredible pianist, composer, arranger, and educator, and just a really all-around great human being. And I know this because I am fortunate enough to count this person as one of my teachers. Ellen Rowe is a graduate of the Eastman School of Music, where she studied with Wright and Bill Dobbins, and is a formidable pianist and composer in her own right. She is currently an Arthur F. Thurnau Professor of Jazz and Contemporary Improvisation on the Chair of Conducting at the University of Michigan, which makes sense because she has been very in demand as not only a pianist, but as a conductor. And the great Ahmad Jamal once selected her to be his conductor for some arrangements that she had written, I believe. She might have to correct me on that, though. Prior to her appointment in Michigan, she served as the Director of Jazz Studies at the University of Connecticut. And she has a new-ish record that came out in January 2019 called Momentum, Portraits of Women in Motion. And we'll tell you all about the record and the amazing musicians that you can hear, the amazing musical stories that you can hear on that record. But I just have to say in advance, spoiler alert, if you get a chance to listen to the track Anthem, it just is just sublime. So without further ado, a woman who needs no further introduction, Ellen Rowe, thank you so much for being here.
Oh, thanks for having me on, Jordan. This is so great. I'm really looking forward to catching up with you, and just thrilled to be back in touch with you. So really proud of everything that you've done since you left U of M. So you're on fire. It's great.
I really appreciate that. So from stories that you used to tell in jazz ensemble, I kind of know that you at least grew up in a partially musical family. So could you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. So I was really, really lucky. My dad was, well, both my parents actually were Juilliard graduates, which is, pretty remarkable in and of itself. They did their undergraduates at Middlebury, a small liberal arts college in Vermont where they met. But my dad was a pianist, music educator, really good, kind of at the time, cocktail club date pianist. I don't think he ever would have called himself a jazz pianist, but he made a lot of money playing in bands for parties and things like that. My mom was a really great flutist. She played in the New Jersey Symphony for a while. And she also one day sat down at the piano and whipped off a Chopin etude. So there was a lot of music in my house. I was the youngest of 5 kids. My dad ended up really starting the music program in my hometown in Ridgefield, Connecticut. High school band director, did the marching band, did everything really, and was a church organist and led the choir and wrote some off-Broadway musicals. So I grew up in a house where there's tons of instruments lying around. There's 2 pianos. All my older brothers, and 2 out of my 3 older brothers were really good musicians and played instruments. My sister, who I didn't see much of growing up because she was 14 years older, was also a cellist and a pianist. She ended up being a poet and a wonderful teacher, but pretty much everybody in the family is in the arts. And I just, grew up in a house completely surrounded by music.
That is a really incredible, I imagine, like a really incredible moment or environment to grow up in. And I know for so many of us, having the right environment growing up, really, I just feel like everybody's got a story of when they fell in love with music or specifically jazz. And I'm wondering kind of when that happened for you, because I know you said that, your father might not necessarily consider himself like a jazz pianist, but when did you fall in love with jazz music specifically?
Well, one of the good things about growing up in that kind of household was it was really, everybody had eclectic musical taste. And so I was hearing everything, not a lot of what you and I would probably think of as straight ahead jazz. I mean, there was not a lot of Barry Harris and, Dexter Gordon, things like that being played, but, there's Stan Getz and Marion McPartland and Dave Brubeck, the Time Out album, things like that. So my parents had an appreciation for jazz, again, not having studied the music in depth, and not having been a part of their culture really at all, except for, pop music at the time. But I was also listening to folk music and pop and classical music. My parents loved, we listened to a lot of chamber music and symphonies and things like that. But I was kind of self-taught. Since I was the youngest of 5 kids, they were not forcing me to take lessons. There were just a bunch of John Thompson books lying around the house, and I had perfect pitch, so I was able to, figure out a lot of the pop songs that I was listening to. I think what really piqued my interest was I played in what our junior high called, euphemistically, I should say, called the jazz band. It was really a rock kind of band. We were playing Carpenters, medleys and things like that, which, was fine with me. I like the Carpenters, but it certainly wasn't jazz in any way, shape, or form. I got to high school, and I figured I would just segue right into the high school jazz band, not having any idea really what was going on at the high school level. And there was an extremely serious jazz lover as a high school jazz band director. And he took me aside and he basically said, look, you may be talented and you may play the piano all right, but if you want to play in my jazz band, you have to learn something about jazz. And that was kind of a wake up call for me. I'd sort of been breezing through doing everything I wanted to do, thinking I was the cat's meow. And then suddenly this guy was going, well, here's some stuff you don't know anything about. And, he was absolutely right. I didn't, he was doing, with the band, he was doing Thad Jones, he was doing Don Ellis. He was doing this wide range of stuff. So he sent me off to this teacher, John Mahegan, who was one of the first, I think kind of one of the first pedagogues, jazz piano pedagogues who wrote things down and made books. He had this series of 4 books that are still available today. And he taught at Juilliard, like before Juilliard did away with its jazz program, then brought it back. So I studied with John, and he scared the heck out of me. I would go down to, in Westport, Connecticut, which is a couple towns away. My mother had to drive me because I was 14 years old. And the man terrified me, but he had hung out with Monk. I mean, he had been on the scene. He knew Bud Powell and stuff. And I barely even knew those names. So he just had me sit down, and he said, here, why don't you try transposing this tune? It was like a Beatles tune, Blackbird. He goes, I'll be back. And, fortunately, I was like, oh, I know this song. I could play it by ear. And since I had pitch, it didn't matter what key. So I could figure it out in any key. And so he came back and he goes, well, can you play it in another key? And I said, yeah, I can whatever key you want. And so at that point, he started to go, oh, okay, well, maybe there's something here I can work with. So I think it was at that point he started introducing me to Bill Evans and Bud Powell, Herbie Hancock. And this was music I really knew nothing about. And it was super challenging because it was chord symbols. And in fact, all right, this is going to get a little nerdy, but I'll keep it short. His approach wasn't actually to use chord symbols. So I wasn't looking at A7 and F minor 7 or whatever. His theory was that you used Roman numerals because then once you got a hold of the progression, then you knew it in any key. I was like, genius, right? So it was Roman numeral, it was Bach, it was chord progressions. And he was absolutely right. So I remember learning some of the blues progressions and just seeing 1, 4, 1, 1, with sevens. And then you had a little X if it was a dominant 7 or whatever. But that, I just really, I did love the music. I didn't understand some of it because I had not been in the culture and not been doing a lot of listening to that point. But the challenge of it really spoke to me. And then as I listened more and more and realized what geniuses these players were and how this idea of improvising in such complicated format. So I would have to say I probably really got bitten around age 15 or so, something like that. That was a very long answer to your question. I'm sorry.
No, that's totally cool. I love that. You're mentioning with a high school jazz ensemble playing all these great composers like Thad Jones, Don Ellis. Mm-hmm. I feel like that even now is such there are some great programs, but that's such a rarity. I mean, that stuff is very, very, richly scored. And I just go back to your the part of your persona as a musician, as an arranger, as a composer, and also as a jazz ensemble conductor. Do you think that back then, I don't want to project onto you, but it seems like you really enjoy all of those things. And do you think back then hearing that those sounds had any impact on your perception of the large jazz ensemble and your choice to kind of pursue it as a means of creative expression through working as a pianist, a composer, and a conductor?
That's such a great question. I haven't thought that much about how high school, I've thought a little bit about high school, but how those specific types of experiences really sort of paved the way. But yeah, absolutely. I mean, I should also mention that we did some Frank Zappa. I mean, this is a band director who was programming John Cage's, 4 minutes, whatever, many seconds of silence, at a concert, and people just didn't know what to make of him. But he really knew his stuff. So yeah, being enmeshed in those sounds definitely had an impact. Now, unfortunately, that band director lasted, I think, 1.5 years or something, and something bizarre happened and he left the school, and a second guy came in, but he was also really good, and he did a little bit more. I mean, he liked Thad Jones and stuff, but we were doing Basie and Bill Holman and things like that with him. So yeah, definitely being in the middle of those sounds at that age definitely had an impact. I mean, it was in high school that I tried to write my first big band chart, and that director said, yeah, go ahead, pick a song you want to arrange and bring it in. And I had no knowledge of what I was doing. I mean, I'd heard the sounds, but and so I picked a tune by Chicago, which I loved. And I remember, I will never forget, sitting at home in my parents' living room, and I had all these pieces of music paper, just single sheets, no score, just single music sheets laid around. And I'd written trumpet 1 on the top of one, trumpet 2 on the other. And I was listening to the piece, and I was kind of going, okay, that sounds like a G major chord. So let me give the trumpet 1 this note and the trumpet 2 this note. I didn't know to do a score. So I was just randomly putting these notes on, and it must have been so many mistakes, and who knows if I had the right number of bars and everything. But I gave it my very best shot. And I remember walking up to my band director proudly and giving him this stack of music paper. I said, "Here's the piece." And he said, "Okay, where's the score?" And I said, "What do you mean score? What score?" He was such a good sport. He let me try to read it, and of course, it was a mess. But eventually, we pulled it together, and I think we played it at some outdoor strawberry ice cream social or something. But yeah, that was my first big band chart. No score.
Wow. And it's funny to hear you say that, and I only say it's funny to hear you say that because I know that I know how when you were always talking to us about handwrite from manuscript and work from a score, and I've seen your scores, for example, the one for Kyle, and just that behemoth of a manuscript tablet, and so to hear you say yeah, my first chart I didn't have a score, I didn't write a score, is just, I mean, who thinks of that when what you see is the part in front of you?
Yeah,
I mean, who thinks to do that?
I know, and it's funny though, because I knew my director was staring at something. I
Right,
mean,
of course.
Why didn't it occur to me that but I didn't know how to do that. So I think I just thought, oh, good, as long as everybody has something to read, I'm golden.
Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely am a fan of still using the pencil and paper to get the music done, and then put it in whatever software program.
And you know what? When my students walk into my office, what the first thing they see is my piano and a giant tablet of manuscript paper. So
bless your heart. I am so happy when you say that. I swear I can still tell the scores when somebody brings something in. I can still tell if they've done this on the computer instead of out of the trouble. At least do a concert reduction in pencil. And then
yeah. Well, and that approach, I'm sure. I mean, Ray Wright, is one of our kind of hallowed kind of teachers of composition and arranging. So I'm wondering if you could kind of segue into talking about your time with Ray and at Eastman, and because obviously you're now writing in full scores and things, and
yeah, I learned that at Eastman. I learned that you do a score. Yeah, Ray is such an important mentor for so many of my peers, and unfortunately, he died way too young at a little over 60 years old, I think, from a brain tumor. But those of us who had the honor and privilege to work with him, I think just sort of assimilated his values and his standards or tried the best we could, assimilate his standard of excellence, and he just was uncompromising. And I mean, he was a great guy, and he was, very pleasant, and had his dog that he loved and would invite us over to play ping pong. And I used to crew for him on his, small little sailboat, but he was exacting. I mean, you came in, prepared for lessons, and he would look. I just remember he would look at a whole score, and if there was like one little couple measures where he said, "Hey, that looks pretty good," you kind of go, "Oh my God, Ray said something looked good," and it was really exciting. I'll still never forget. I think I showed him an entire studio orchestra chart, and he thumbed to like about 2/3 of the way through, and he saw a line that I had scored for bass clarinet, bowed bass, and Fender Rhodes, and he goes, "Oh, that's going to be great." And I thought, oh, I've arrived. I've written 3 bars of music that he says is going to be great. But it was something to live up to. I mean, he was extremely organized, and I do think I'm so grateful that I had the chance to watch somebody work like that, who taught arranging and taught film scoring, taught a jazz band pedagogy course, and directed the top jazz ensemble, and worked with all the arranging students who was that organized. I don't think I can quite live up to him, but I mean, I know there's a standard out there for how things should work. And he just had very high expectations for all of us. And I'm really, really grateful for that, because I think it made us, do the best work that we could do at, 21, however old we were. And then getting to kind of be his teaching assistant while he was starting to put together, his first books, arranging books, that was pretty exciting too, and see those come to shape.
And now we know that Inside the Score is just, among others, is just it's like it's it. I mean, and I look at those concert reductions and the concert reductions that I did for you, and I think, like, I mean, that's it. Like, I mean, I still do that with scores that I'm studying, with even like, just as a conductor, looking through and being like, all right, cool. So what do I actually have in front of me? And can I play it on the piano? And can I sing it? And, if the question is in real time, can I play it on the piano? The answer is usually no. But, getting to that, getting to that standard, as you were saying, like the exacting, that exacting standard, I feel like it is just so helpful. And I think, when you think about educators, and you think about, especially when you're talking about, composing and arranging, it's just, I mean, the things that he did for the field are really innumerable. So what a great lesson from a great teacher.
It really was. I mean, score study is where it's at. And anytime anybody comes in and says, yeah, I really want to learn to write, I'm saying, well, there's about, 500 charts sitting down there in the library, and you can pick a couple of those out, and that's going to be your first thing to do is, start learning.
Absolutely.
You got to know the ranges, and you've got to know the transpositions and blah, blah, blah. But, what Ray showed us was, the concert reductions, so that you see what's going on, but then the timbre outlines.
Yes.
Right? How does it develop, and what textures is he using to build, is the composer using to build excitement and interest? And so that book is really invaluable. I mean, I think it's taught a lot of us how to teach and how to write at the same time.
Yeah, and a beautiful resource in that way, because when I feel like when I feel like I'm working with my students and teaching my students, I feel like, not only am I becoming a better teacher, I'm becoming a better writer. Through seeing and it's a really surreal thing, because I mean, everybody hears that old adage, right? Like teaching makes you a better insert thing here. But when you see it happening to yourself, it is a really surreal thing.
And certain things that I might take for granted because I'm a pianist and I can write, maybe quicker than somebody who's not a pianist. But then to look at those scores that, whatever it is might be looking at, going, okay, well, I have to explain to someone who's not a pianist, how do I get from C on the top of an F minor 7 chord to this beautiful voicing with 11s and things like that. And, so I really went back and went, okay, so we start with a complete closed position F minor chord. And okay, I see they took that second note from the top and they dropped it down. And, they took the 5th out and replaced it with a 6th, blah, blah, blah. And it was really cool. It was like reverse engineering, the voicing. But that's the beauty of it. You can teach yourself and you can sit down and find the sounds you like, but then you can look at, Bob Mintzer, Don Sebesky, or Bill Holman's score, any Duke Ellington, my God, and look at what they did and go, how did they get there from the melody with the chord symbol? And it's just fascinating to me.
And then, of course, one of your other teachers, the wonderful Bill Dobbins, has this other approach, right? So we're talking about, not thinking so vertically as a lot of us, start thinking, but thinking about writing lines, thinking about being horizontal with the music. And he's got that book on line writing and just again, another great resource.
It absolutely is. The linear arranging book, it's so well thought out as an approach, and it, by the time that came out, I was already thinking about, here's your arrival point, and we work backwards from the arrival point. But Bill just laid it out so brilliantly as to how the lines move. And it reminds me, I just heard this great quote the other day. There's a wonderful organization that I'm on the board of called the International Society for Jazz Arranging and Composition, ISJAC. I think we're coming up on 5 years now. But there was a big, we did a conference 2 months ago, I guess, and there was a tribute to Bill Holman where a lot of people who really knew a good bit about him and his writing got, just spoke, and we had a little roundtable discussion. I was just listening. I wasn't a panelist. But the great quote that I took away was they were talking about there's a lot of composers who write north to south, but Bill Holman writes west to east. And I was just like, yeah, perfect. Great way to, we have these things, these voicings that can march along, but then we have the guys like Gil and Duke and Holman who write this way, right across. And it's, cool way to describe it.
Absolutely. Now I want to pivot a little bit. So I know you well enough to know that you would never say this about yourself, but I'm going to say it about you anyway. So you're a really groundbreaking educator. In addition to being a really gifted pianist and composer and arranger, you are known for being one of the first female chairs of a major university jazz program. You're known for having such a passion for recruiting and for seeing the gender balance and equity. That the program at Michigan, I think at one point was like 9 out of 55 members of the program. And granted, that is pretty remarkable considering usually, you see like one, maybe.
Yeah, right.
So I'm wondering if you can talk about your kind of that passion and where it comes from. And of course, this is me kind of asking a question that I've heard the answer to already, but for our audience, I'm just wondering if you could kind of expound it, because that sort of work over the course of a career, it doesn't come out of nowhere. And you have to be really, really dedicated, because there are so many times when I feel like you just hit a wall.
Yeah, well, this is something that's been really occupying my mind a lot, as you know, especially in the last 5 to 10 years, and even more so recently, because I just was asked to do a chapter for a book on jazz and gender that Routledge Press is putting on. I just finished that up, and I've been in good communication with Terry Lynn Carrington and Chris Davis at Berkeley's Institute for Gender Justice, it's always on my mind, and I've been also working at the Jerry Allen Jazz Camp, which is Regina Carter is now running, which is camp for, plug it here because we're looking for more campers. It's an all-female jazz camp, and it's just unfortunately, last year and this year we're remote, but it's still working. We're still making it work. It's Marion, Hayden, and Allison Miller and Regina, and this is Carla Cook. And it's just this amazing, and I think Bria Skonberg is there this year too. It's this amazing collection of women faculty, and we get these incredible young women who just blossom, because they're all supported and around their peers, and not worrying about any other energy except female energy around them, which is completely supportive. Thank you for putting that up there. And then also I've been running the Sisters in Jazz collegiate combo competition for the Gen organization for a while. So it's just, I've had the chance to see what happens when young women get to be together in a group and feel the support and aren't worrying about having to prove themselves to the guys or worrying about any gender dynamics or power struggles or anything. And believe me, I love all my male colleagues and all my male students, and this is not not dig on them in any way. But I've been around enough young women to see what happens when they are in these situations where they might be the only young woman in a group. I've seen lots of high school situations where all the guys go off to jam and never invite the young women. I see tons of situations where the young women don't have the courage to stand up and take a solo. And I just want to see all that change. I mean, I don't want women going into jazz who don't like it, but I want them to understand how great it is and to have the chance to experience soloing and expressing themselves. And most of all, I just want them to feel welcome in the music. So that's, I just am trying to do the reach out, because I think our program is the better for having both racial and gender, representation, diversity. The more diverse our program is, the better for everybody. And I'm really proud this year because out of our 15 freshmen coming in the door next year, 5 are women, so that's 33%. So that's going to be cool. And we have a female grad student coming in the door as well, which is also going to be great. So I think, and it's also tapping back into my own insecurities. In high school, I got a chance to, kind of have a leadership role in the band because, again, I think my perfect pitch, and I was taking jazz lessons and blah, blah, blah. But college, it was a little different. College, I was just about the only woman in the program. Every so often, Sherry Fetter was a wonderful pianist and writer who came in, I think I was a senior, she was a freshman. And she's a real successful jingle composer in New York, but she ended up not really playing, even though she was a good player. Maria Schneider, of course, tag teamed again. She came in towards the end, an amazing, as we all know, incredible writer, a groundbreaking writer, and also a good pianist. But again, she didn't really follow through in the piano. She plays to write, but she doesn't play out publicly really. But I just experienced what it's like to be the only woman in an environment with all guys, and as nice as they were, and there's still some of my dear friends, I didn't feel that much support for my playing. And I think that's kind of why I drifted more into writing at Eastman and came back to playing more later when I, kind of established myself and went, wait a minute, I love to play. I should be playing. But so, yeah, I really just, I've thought about this so much now. And I was just in Omaha yesterday adjudicating high school bands, and there's only 2 female directors out of 8, which actually was better than I was worried there wouldn't be any. And there was some bands with no women or 1 woman, and there was a couple bands that had 6 or 7 women, but again, very few of them were soloing. And that's where I worry. I just want them to get more comfortable and to feel more empowered, to get up and stand up and take a solo.
Yeah, well, and I don't think it's helpful when you have one of the most incredible female musicians, and I'm not even gonna qualify it by genre, but the great Mary Lou Williams, when she had that review that Ogupanasi wrote about her, where he was like, yeah, so you wouldn't even know it was a woman playing. Like you wouldn't even know. Like it sounds like a man. Like you listen to the left hand and it sounds like a man. And it's like, dude, that's not helpful. Like that's not helpful at all. Like, and so when you have that,
yeah, that's always been, I mean, don't get me started on all of this. I mean, Jerry Allen got a review like that. I mean, Jerry Allen.
Right. Yeah.
I'm speechless. I mean, and I've been really patronized I got patronized in an interview in Downbeat where they didn't even assign the record to, it's like maybe my 3rd album, to a jazz person. It was clearly somebody who knew nothing about jazz because they talked about my chording instead of comping.
Oh, geez.
I don't remember the other exact, I think I've been trying to forget, but something about not just like my right hand lines, you're talking about my solo lines or whatever, but something about tinkling little dancing. I mean, it was just bullshit, but pardon my French.
Well, yeah, it is.
I can take criticism. You can be critical, but don't patronize it by not even using the right terminology to describe what's going on. So yeah, it's been pretty horrendous. The whole sounds like a man or doesn't sound like a man. That's always been our standard.
Yeah.
It's I remember in college somebody criticizing me for sounding too much like Bill Evans.
Oh, jeez.
Too much like Bill Evans? I mean, nobody told Bill Evans he was sounding too much like Bill Evans.
Right.
So yeah. So that was, anyway, that's a whole another topic, but.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I think, speaking of the legendary Jerry Allen, who just, I'm speechless just because of who I know she was, her legacy, like her legacy, not only as a just a ridiculous player.
Yeah.
But also as one of the most caring individuals that I have ever met in my entire life.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
just it just blows my mind in perhaps the worst way, for her to receive something akin to that.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, I remember sitting in her office when that happened, and just not even knowing what to say except just to become so outraged along with her. But yeah, Jerry was one of a kind, and I feel just so blessed to have been able to get to know her and watch her work and hear her play. And I mean, she would come into my office sometimes and say, "Well, what do you think about this?" And she would just sit down and play, and I was just mesmerized. Well, do you think that's too much pedal? I'm going, "Oh my God, no!" So it was great.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Professor Allen is kind of one of the dedicatees, by way of Mary Lou Williams, perhaps not so ironically, of your, and I keep wanting to say new album. I guess it's not terribly new, but still it's your latest album, I could say.
It is.
Your latest record, Momentum: Portraits of Women in Motion. And this record just features just a knockout band, just ridiculous players. Allison Miller, Ingrid Jensen, Tia Fuller, Virginia Mayhew, Lisa Perrott. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. Yeah. And so I can you talk about, well, first of all, why Momentum? Why not necessarily the title, but what gave you the idea to make this project?
Well, I had a sabbatic leave coming up, and I wanted to make sure that I put in a proposal that just wasn't kind of BS and, oh yeah, I want to go write some music. And I was trying to think of what I wanted my next album to be, because everything I'd up to that point was, it was trio or quartet. I think there was Ingrid's on one with Andrew, so it's, quintet for some of it. And I'd been thinking a lot about, women who, I always get asked, who were your women heroes? And but always in music, they all say, who inspired you to play? And, I trot out, Marion McPartland or whomever, but frankly, growing up, there really weren't. I didn't know about Mary Lou Williams until I got to college. I didn't know about Patrice Rushen or any of these amazing players. I just hadn't heard of them. But the thing is that when I started to really think about what inspired me to kind of just do what I do, or even kind of have the guts to be a woman band director, any of that stuff, it really was a combination of a lot of different types of women in my life, including my mother, who is just, remarkable inspiration for a lot of different reasons. And then I started thinking about people, maybe not necessarily even, people that I kind of grew up idolizing, like sports stars, like Billie Jean King, Martina Navratilova. And I thought, wow, because I remember I was in high school and they were out there playing great tennis. They were, advocating for women's rights. They were advocating for equal pay. Martina, it was in the process of coming out as gay, and they were just breaking down all these barriers. And there was runners who I really admired, like Joan Benoit Samuelson. And I thought, these women really empowered me to do what I do. I mean, maybe they weren't creative inspirations in the sense of, people that I listened to play music. But then the people I did grow up listening to in high school, junior high and high school, were the Joni Mitchells and Carly Simons, Carole Kings. So I thought, why don't I write an album that pays tribute to a lot of these women, even if they weren't jazz players? And then, of course, I also wanted to write a piece in honor of Jerry and Mary Lou. And then I also started thinking about all the social justice issues that have really been on my mind, for a long time now. And I started doing some research and realized there's all these amazing women like Fannie Lou Hamer I had never even heard of, Mary Bethune-Clark. I just was going, wait a minute, I keep thinking I'm progressive and I know all this stuff and I know nothing. I know nothing about the civil rights movement. But the women that were involved anyway. So I just started thinking, okay, this album is going to be, every piece is going to be a dedication to women who've inspired me, and Diane Fossey and Jane Goodall, because I, care a lot about species and flora and fauna that are going extinct. Excuse me, I'm so sorry. Let me turn that phone off. And we will get right down. I thought I'd already done that. So yeah, so that was really the idea behind the album, was that each piece would be a tribute. And it was, for me, thinking about, the women in motion thing. I was kind of thinking about the running and the, in the sports, but it was also about just the women's movement in general, over the last however many, 50 years at least. So that's kind of where the title came from. And then it was just from there, it was an easy step to think, well, who do I want to have play in this album? And then that kind of led me to this idea of, Five Horns, which is just such a fun group to write for. You have a lot of variety of ways you can write, and not every piece is, using the full octet. So yeah, that's kind of how it all came into shape. And I'm really happy with the way it came out.
Yeah, I mean, I put the link in here to the purchase link, but if anybody hasn't checked out Momentum, highly recommend checking that out. And I wanted to take this opportunity to kind of nerd out a little bit, because and talk about one of my favorite tracks on the record, which is Anthem. And I think, when I think about that tune, when I listen to that tune, like if I were to listen to that tune in a complete vacuum, I would know that you wrote it. Like I hear your voice in it so much. And the first recording of it that I heard was of you and Andrew playing it as a duo on clarinet.
Yeah.
And so just I think the intimacy of that setting kind of allowed my ear to kind of gravitate toward the harmony. And so I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about the inspiration for the tune, and also kind of if you'd oblige a discussion about like just some broad strokes harmonic things that you were doing with the tune.
Oh, wow. Okay. Well, thank you. It's one of the least kind of, jazz-like tunes on the album. And I'm really glad you like it. It's I've been trying to really reconcile that side of my writing and my experience in music, which is not all straight ahead jazz. Because like I said, I didn't grow up really listening to that much of it. I grew up with, in fact, I just did a concert on Sunday, a live stream from Carytown with Marion Hayden, who's also on the album, of course, the great Marion Hayden, and two recent graduates of our program. I'm not sure if you've met Meg Brennan, saxophonist who did her undergrad at State, and Eliza Salem, who just graduated in drum set from our program. But I decided for that program, I was going to kind of go back and revisit these influences, and the influences I chose, and Marion chose two pieces, and I put Anthem, which is why I'm thinking about this now. I put Anthem on the program, but the other pieces I reworked Carole King's I Feel the Earth Move and Tapestry. And I reworked Joni Mitchell's Both Sides Now. And that music really, the Tapestry album, when I started to think about that album and go back and look at all the cuts on it, I can sit down at the piano and pretty much play every song from that album still, and I haven't listened to it in years. It had this incredible impact on me. And so I think Anthem is a direct relation, it comes from that folk influence, the Joni and the Carole King and the types of progressions that I heard them play. But I think that the thing that is fun for me is to kind of invest my sort of jazz sensibilities, combine them with that love of sort of the folk rock thing, and just see if there's a way for those two styles to meet in a way that doesn't sound contrived. And my concern on Sunday was to not wreck the songs that, people are going, oh, wow, she's going to play Tapestry. And, yeah, I did play Tapestry, but yeah, I reharmonized it, and I added some bars, and I took some liberties with the form and blah, blah, blah. And then I took solo, over the changes. So it's a balancing act that I really enjoy. But the harmonies, let me think about it. Yeah, so there's, definitely, you can tell it was written at the piano. I think, it's got a piano player's sensibility to it. Little vamps are clearly, you can just kind of see where they lie right in front of you, and when you're sitting at the piano. The clarinet sound, clarinet, I wish I could think of a good way. It's so evocative without being in your face. Flute is gorgeous. I played flute in high school. I love the sound of flute, but it's definitely a thing. Right? It's that beautiful, clean, pristine, and as a woodwind doubler, exactly what I'm saying. And clarinet is this dark, woody sound, but it's it can be whatever the player kind of wants it to be. And of course, having Andrew play it was wonderful because he's such a great clarinetist. And then on the album, it's Janelle Reichman. So I want to make sure to give her, and Melissa Gardner, who plays trombone on that cut. She doesn't solo on it, but Melissa's a graduate of our program. Those are the only other two players. And Marlene Rosenberg is another player on the album. So I want to make sure they get mentioned. But let's see, there's some pedal point, harmonies just moving over a stagnant bass line. And I've talked with Andrew a lot about this too, but a lot of times I think I really like to think about the bass line, and it doesn't necessarily need to be root position chords. In fact, a lot of time it isn't. It's just how the bass line is going to move. So I think like the little refrain, dee boo doo beep boop beep ba, that's like a first inversion chord, G over B, and then that bass line moves up to like a C6 over C, and then the next it's like a G over D. And then it's a C over E. So, I'm really trying to think about a bass motion a lot. So it's kind of contrapuntal in a way. But to not, then the trick is to not add too many sharp 11s and flat 9s and flat 13s, because that's not, the way that music generally works. I'm sure there's sharp 11 in there somewhere, but it's not a blues, so it shouldn't sound like a blues. And then I think the biggest thing is just to come up with the kind of soaring melody that can stay in your mind and it's fun for people to play. So I think it was a combination of a piano vamp that I really liked that comes back a couple times, a progression that made sense to me because of generally the bass motion, and then and just coming up with a melody. I remember I wrote it. I was on my sabbatic leave and I had 2 artist retreat residencies, which I cannot recommend highly enough, by the way. If you really want to be in a good space to write, I went to the Banff Center for the Arts, their artist colony, and then I went to a place in Wyoming called Ucross, and I wrote a lot of the album. Well, I split the album up. Half of it was kind of written at Banff, half of it was written at Ucross. But I remember playing through Anthem in my little cabin at Ucross, just thinking, oh man, I'm worried this is too folk and it's too trite, and nobody's gonna, they're gonna think it's too lightweight or something. And I'm always, questioning myself. I think most composers do question themselves, but it's funny to me now because I went ahead and went, no, I like it. It's fun to play. I'm going ahead. I'm committing to it. And, people have really liked it. So there's a lesson in there that you should, trust your instincts and not be too judgmental if possible.
Yeah, absolutely. So I actually have one of my own students here.
Oh, cool.
Who is ready kind of to join us, and she's a terrific young pianist who studies at Hope, and so I wanted her to be able to meet you and talk to you a little bit because as one might imagine, I think we talk. With you, it was about Ray, and it was about about Bill, and of course now, I talk about you and about Andrew and about Ed and Sir Alan and Dennis, and so so this is Leah Renardi.
Hello, it is nice to meet you, Professor Rowe.
Yeah, it's nice to meet you. Thank you for being a part of this. This is great.
No, thank you, Dr. V, for having me on. I have heard only great things, and I can verify that on the upright piano in his office, there is a very large manuscript. So I just wanted to get that out there as well.
You have no idea how good that makes me feel.
Yes, cool. Actually, and when I started to write my own first tune, and I went to him for advice again, he's like, hand score it. So
yeah. Isn't it great to see your own music on the page in your hand? Isn't that great? I think that's really special.
It is. It's fun too because nobody else can read it, decipher it entirely, and then it just makes it your own more. But anyways, I have like 1,000 questions. I'm trying to get my head together here.
Cool.
I guess as you were talking about, where your passion comes from with women in jazz, can you talk a little bit? You talked about how, it's tough for us when we're surrounded in an all male ensemble, and it's us about pushing through that. So how did you, because I'm guessing you didn't just get to magically play in all female ensembles your entire career. How did you push through that?
Well, I do have to say that I mentioned earlier I didn't get as much support maybe for my playing as I got for my writing. So I kind of went into the writing because it's a little bit easier. I was by myself. I was writing. I would bring it into the band, and if it worked, the gender thing didn't seem to matter so much. Either the piece was good or it wasn't good. And the playing, yeah, I did get a little beaten down and did not really believe in myself the way I should have as a pianist when I was in college. And I think at the time, a lot of the guys didn't even realize that they were my friends, and they didn't realize that they were vibing me. They didn't mean to vibe me, but it was happening. And I wasn't getting a lot of people patting me in the back and saying, hey man, you should just stick with it. Go in the practice room for 2 hours and work on these lines, and just, yeah, you're going to be fine. Just, I wasn't getting that kind of support, but I was playing lots of club dates. So I was able to do that with the guys until I found out I was getting paid $10 less than all the rest of them. And then that was another wake up call. So I think the pushing through didn't really happen until I finally got mad enough and went, I want to play. I should play. And when I started teaching at Connecticut, I had some nice chances to play. And I was starting over. There was no expectations. Nobody knew me. I was able to just kind of sit down and, do what I did. And, but yeah, I think it really took this kind of hitting myself, on the side of the head going, you want to play, just play. And, with it comes responsibility to practice and get better, play better. So I think it was that awakening for me that finally got me to sort of push through a little bit.
No, absolutely. And then did you ever notice, because it is a conversation, when you came with that attitude, kind of that new attitude, did you notice that the guys would start to respond differently back to you? Like that energy, did that change?
Yeah, as all of us do, I think, I've had insecurity issues for a long time. I always question, I was like, oh, I don't think I'm as good as this person, or, I'm always worried when I'm leading a group. But part of the thing that's been really helpful to me that I'll share with you has been leading your own group. I'm trying to be a sideman, but leading your own group and being the one calling the shots, getting to program the music you want to play, the way you want to run. That's been very helpful for me. But yeah, that just sitting down and going. And actually, the other thing I'll mention too is I took a bunch of lessons from Penny Werner, who wrote that book Effortless Mastery, which has been extremely helpful to me and a lot of my students. And I just remember him watching me play and then looking at me and just going, "Why do you have such an antagonistic relationship with the instrument?" Oh my God. That was the first lesson. That's what he said to me. And it was like, he said, you're just radiating this fear and this anxiety. And he goes, what I want is for that piano bench to be the most comfortable seat in the house. And eventually, after, working and doing a lot of these exercises and thinking about it more and trying to get to that headspace at the piano where I was just channeling and not, having all the voices going off, I can honestly, in fact, I'm looking at it now, I can honestly say that piano bench is the place I'd just, rather be than any other seat in the house. So it's been a process.
No, thank you. Thank you so much for your insight on that. I guess I've got one more too. You talked about, you didn't have a lot of female jazz heroes growing up, but I'm curious, like through high school and college, who were you listening to? Whose sound were you trying to emulate? And then maybe who did you end up, having other people tell you sounded like?
Well, the first person who's, I think, as a jazz pianist, who really spoke to me was Bill Evans, because I just resonated, I'll be perfectly honest, I didn't grow up in the black church, and so I wasn't hearing a lot of blues, I wasn't hearing a lot of deeply swinging, soulful music, and so my entry into that, kind of jazz world that I could access was Bill and his influences, because they were more akin to my influences. He played classical piano, and I obviously was listening to a lot of the same sorts of things I was listening to. And from Bill, then I was able to kind of take a couple more steps and, somebody like Herbie Hancock and go, wow, that's what's going on there. And then I got at some point introduced to all the great Blue Note pianists. I fell in love with Wynton Kelly, Tommy Flanagan, Sonny Clark, all those guys. And so I kind of went backwards. I kind of started with the contemporary pianists at the time, and I've gradually been working. I haven't quite, I don't play any stride piano. That's, not something I do well. I admire it, and, but I haven't quite gone that far back in the music. But yeah, I think my window in was people who were playing at that time that I was listening. And Chick Corea was a big influence for me. Again, different kind of player than Herbie or Hank Jones or whomever. But those were my entry points. And then from there, I started diving more into bebop and Blue Note albums and things like that.
No, thank you. This is all great stuff. No, I appreciate it.
Sure. And let's stay in touch. I mean, Jordan's got my email. Reach out anytime. We'll promote the Barry Allen Jazz Camp. I'll be teaching at that. I'll teach Marion, Hayden, and it's remote, but it should be a really good time in the end of June. We're looking for campers. So.
All right, I will pass it on. We've got a few more. I will say our freshman class this year at Hope. We've got a couple up and coming female jazz musicians. It used to be just me, so.
Wow, bless your heart.
It's exciting to see some more. Yeah.
Yeah, well, please share. I know Jordan will put it. I don't see a link in here, but I know Jordan's got the link. It's put on by NJPAC, New Jersey Performing Arts Center. There it is again. Jordan's on it. Still on it. Yes, but share that link with any young woman you know. It's really an all ages camp. So
wonderful.
Have some more players.
Yes, absolutely. Always. I mean, anything that certainly bears Professor Allen's name, but anything certainly that is such a great experience. It's just so worth doing. We have a comment here, a little bit on the lengthy side, from Lisa Sung, who teaches piano at Hope. And I'm sorry, Leah, I just covered part of your face, but she says, "Thank you so much, Professor Rowe, for your appreciation for women jazz musicians, especially mentioning incoming women freshmen. Recognizing and encouraging them just assures me how much you care about future contributions that these young women will give to the world."
Oh, that's so nice. Professor Sung, thank you. I hope our paths cross sometime in the near future. Yeah, Jordan's got my email, so feel free to reach out. But thank you for that. That means a lot to me.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to kind of open it up. If any of our viewers have any questions for Professor Rowe at this point, you can go ahead and pop them into the comments. But I have to, there's something that we've kind of like talked about a little bit, but we also kind of haven't talked about, and that is your love of trail running. So when I was a student at Michigan, and I won't say when that is because that's going to make me sound ancient. No, I'm just kidding.
No, you are far from ancient.
So when I was a student, you were, I think you might have done one of your first 100-mile trail races.
I think I tried. I think try is the
okay.
I did not finish that 100-miler. It was Bryce Canyon in Utah. Yeah.
Yeah.
It was much hotter, and I knew the altitude was going to be challenging. I wasn't banking on how hot it would be in the canyons and then how freezing cold it would be at night. So, yeah, I made it 50 miles and had to drop out. But yeah. That's what I remember, yeah. Yeah, trail running. I just did a nice 8-mile run in the Potawatomi this afternoon. And, this is something I do want to mention, especially with Leah here, is that, we think about ways to empower ourselves and, support from other people and believing in ourselves. But one of the things I think that's made a big difference in my life is being an athlete. And it doesn't need to be running. It can be anything. And just being out in the trails and running these races. And I'm running to try to be super fast and just running to finish if I can and not fall on my face. I've certainly taken a lot of falls trail running. But being out in nature, when I come back from those runs, I could conquer the world. It's very important. So yeah, I love trail running. I was bird watching today too, which is even better.
What now?
Oh, sorry. I was just curious too with that follow-up. Like, do you ever have are there certain things I'm going to have 1,000 questions. Are there certain things in nature that are like more inspiring to you when you compose versus when you just improvise? Or I don't know, are there just are birds more, some like Messiaen had bird song, do you have anything that's really calling to you?
Sure. So on the album, there's actually one piece, which I think is the only solo piano piece in the album, called Song of the Meadowlark. And it was inspired by the Western Meadowlark that I was listening to. It was right outside my cabin when I was at UCross in Wyoming. And I used that little tidbit of its song as an inspiration for the piece, and I dedicated it to my mother because she's the one who got me into birding in the first place. But it's just something that, again, takes you out of yourself. You're out there in the trail, and suddenly you spot a flash of red, and wow, it's a Scarlet Tanager. And, I just stop in admiration of the Scarlet Tanager. It's a rose-breasted grosbeaker, whatever it is. But yeah, no, there's scenery on some of the trail runs that I know it may not be that I was consciously thinking of depicting a canyon or something. I wasn't trying to follow the lines of the canyon with notes or anything like that. But just the vision or the thought of the feelings I had when I was in the canyon or whatever, those have definitely played I think a pretty major role in some of the pieces that I've written.
Right on. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Great question.
So we actually had talked about, and I know that you are a kind of a champion of, advocating for mental health, and advocating for just musicians, especially taking care of themselves from that standpoint. And at one point you were talking to us and you said, well, for me, when I'm on a run, like that is my, that's how I am, accessing that higher state of consciousness, as your colleague Ed Sareth might say.
Yes.
So I'm wondering if you can talk about a little bit about, the ways in which, in addition to running and staying active, being an athlete, that you can, that you kind of advocate for that in your students.
Yeah, I've been trying to make sure everybody knows about, I mean, we talk about, and Ed, of course, is a huge champion of this. There's been a lot of talk about meditation and the value of however you want to describe it. It could just be quiet space, or, it could be prayer for people. It could be whatever you think of it. But I really have noticed, especially with COVID and with all the anxiety that's surrounding us and the political free fall that we're in right now, that need for quiet space. I mean, there's two things I think there's a huge need for. One is that quiet space. I've been using the Headspace app, and I need to be doing it every day. And I can't say I've been doing it every day, but every time I do it, it's like, okay, when I've made that time and I'm done doing it, I just feel a lot more centered and focused. Because otherwise I just feel completely scattered, and running does the same thing for me. I come back and I feel focused. So I think that the two things for me are that quiet time to focus and breathe, just practice breathing, which is hugely important. And then also social interactions. I mean, I think, and I'm only mentioning that because of COVID. I think we've all been so distanced, here we are. I mean, this is great. I mean, I am super happy to see you and to meet Leah, and the fact that we can all be together in this space. Otherwise I would have been driving to Grand Rapids, which would have been fine too. I would be happy to do it. So this is great, but the need to have that close personal contact with people, to be hanging out with them, to be able to hug them, to, all that. So that's the thing, especially this year, that I've been trying to make sure my students are getting to do. And, trying to keep a semblance of community in the program. Normally after a concert of some sort, we might all go out for pizza. And that was not possible this year. So in the fall, after a jazz showcase concert, I just thought, what the heck? Any student who was involved in the concert, I had a pizza delivered to their apartment. I just thought, we can't have the people coming to the pizza. We can have the pizza coming to the people. So it's just, trying to think of ways to continue to, to reach out and, still keep our sense of community.
That sense of community is so, so important. And the way in which, I mean, it's a community art form. It's participatory. Everybody's, getting in there, playing and hanging out, oh boy. So Lisa,
yeah,
Lisa just dropped a.
Yeah, good for, no, I mean, yeah, this is the problem, because I'm going to say something that's going to be one of the most well-loved albums of all time, but there is a reason for it. But I mean, an album that I just remember listening to, my family has this little cabin in Maine, and I remember at night I'd be up in this little sleeping cabin, and I had a cassette recorder up there, and this album that I was playing night after night was Kind of Blue. So, I mean, as trite as that may sound, because it's so famous and so well known, I just always come back to that. And if I had to, I mean, I love the music of Kenny Wheeler. So the music for large and small ensembles is another one that's, if I have a couple Desert Island albums, it's going to be those. And then I would say Shirley Horn, Here's to Life with Johnny Mandel orchestrations. Not a bastion of jazz soloing and not a lot of bastion of, hard swinging straight ahead, but just music that touches your soul. Every piece is a pearl. And Shirley Horn is just one of the greatest, most unheralded, I would say, singer jazz pianists out there. But those are just three that come to mind right off the bat. And then some of Herbie's albums. I mean, yeah, see, this is the problem. You get started on something like this and you go down the rabbit hole. But everything from Herbie, Empyrean Isles to Possibilities to the Joni album, I mean, you could pretty much just take Herbie's discography with you wherever you went. You'd be set for life.
Yeah. Well, and one of my favorites, the piano.
Oh, yeah.
Just a. But see, that's the thing. Like you said, we get on this rabbit hole, and it's like, yeah, let's dig into Herbie's entire discography, and it's like, it's like, oh, Desert Island. Well, can I take the entire Bill Evans? Like, can I take everything that, every record that Wynton Kelly was ever on? So like,
yeah, that's the great thing about this music. There's so much great music to listen to. Yeah, that's a great question though, Lisa.
Yeah. Well, Professor Rowe, I just wanted to thank you again so much for your time. It's great to, again, have the opportunity to catch up with you, for you to meet one of my terrific students, and hopefully she'll get plugged in with, some stuff, and I'll send her your email address. But thanks again. And to everybody out there listening, thanks for listening and spending some time with us tonight on this Wednesday in, oh my gosh, May 2021. When did that happen?
Yeah, no idea. But thank you so much for having me on, Jordan. It was just great to see you. And like I said, so happy for all your amazing accomplishments since you left U of M, and more power to you. And this is great. I hope we can stay in touch.
Likewise. All right. Thanks, everyone.
All right. Take care.